have you here. My name is Linda Larkin. I'm the Executive Director of the Evanston Chamber. We've put this together for our commercial businesses and landowners, building owners to answer some questions. Today with us we have Scott Smith, who is Chief Communications Officer, Samantha Steele, who is the Director of Commercial Valuations, Christina Lynch, Legal Counsel, and Don Meyer will be leading this, and he is the Chief Valuation Officer. Commissioner Larry Sufferton is also in the room right here. So feel free to ask questions after the initial presentation. I did pass out some index cards in case it gets crowded in here, but I think we can probably just raise hands and keep quiet. Thank you. Thanks for coming.
No, thank you for inviting us. And thank you all for coming this evening. As I was introduced, I'm Don Meyer. I'm the Chief Valuations Officer. I joined the Assessor's Office on January 2nd after 46 years as a commercial real estate lender, mostly in Chicago. The longest tenure I had was at the old First National Bank of Chicago. I was there from 79 to 97. Last 5.5 years, I ran lending at a bank, Byline Bank, which a number of you may know merged with First Bank and Trust last May. And so I've known Evanston real estate for a very long time, and have financed a number of properties in Evanston, throughout the northern suburbs, and throughout all of Cook County. I'm hoping that this can be a dialogue as much as a presentation, and so I welcome your questions. More than anything, I'm going to try to give a perspective on the process that we use and our thinking in coming to the assessed valuations. We did have a meeting a couple of weeks ago, Commissioner Sufferton, for residential properties. The residential property process also reports to me, so I'll try to answer questions to the extent you have them on residential, but tonight was really meant to focus on commercial properties. Let's start with a couple of basics. We're mandated by the State of Illinois Constitution to determine the market value for each and every property in Cook County. And that's a fair market value. Essentially, what would the property trade at if it were to sell? A willing buyer and a willing seller, neither under any pressure to act. One big difference between residential and commercial is that residential properties, which include single-family homes, condos, and apartments, are assessed at 10% of market value, and commercial properties are assessed at 25% of value. And that was a decision that was made years and years ago, as far as I understand. So our focus has been from the very start, let's try to get our arms around what is fair market value and let that drive the assessed value. With that, I don't know how many of you have had a chance to look at our website and see what we've posted on the website, giving some detail. I'll try to go through this.
This document, Don, so you know, this document did go out with the e-blast, so everyone had an opportunity to
So I'm not gonna try to repeat this or read it word for word. I'll try to just hit the high points. We try to do on commercial properties, come to an estimate of market rents and expenses, and we also try to come up with what we believe are fair cap rates for the sale of the property. We'll talk in a little bit about how we determine the cap rates. One of the things about Evanston, it's a vibrant community. There's strong demand for your commercial properties, and you've had a significant amount of new development. And my fingers keep touching the button, so. In terms of commercial, we've got 326 separate apartment projects, 77 office, 351 commercial retail, and 64 industrial. I'm gonna figure out how to get out of that.
No, I can drive when we talk.
We can go to the next slide. These are the rent levels that we used. Average apartment rent, $1,350 with a 6% vacancy, $14.50 a square foot for offices, 5% vacancy. You know, these are pretty self-explanatory. We went looking at CoStar, LoopNet, local papers. We checked websites for properties that had a website, particularly on apartments. We were able to get rents there. There is a data product called TREP, T-R-E-P-P. You can go to the homepage for that data model at trep.com, www.trep.com. TREP tracks every loan in America that is financed through commercial mortgage-backed securities or by Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. Every loan that's on TREP is financed through a publicly issued security, which is registered with the Securities and Exchange Commission. It has proven to be, the commercial mortgage-backed securities market has proven to be a very reliable provider of finance and had very low default rates relative to lenders who had problematic issues in 08, 9, and 10. It ends up with pretty good data. Every borrower, when they are going to get a loan from a commercial mortgage-backed securities lender, the lender does a third-party appraisal, and the property owner has to supply 3 years of financial information at the time the loan is made, and the borrower has to supply quarterly detailed operating statements, so we can get really good data on what rents are, expenses are, and the appraised values at the time a loan is made on properties in that are recorded in TREP. Commercial mortgage-backed securities captures about plus or minus 10% of all non-apartment properties nationwide. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac finance about 60 to 70% of the apartments nationwide. So we the assessor's office is subscribed to TREP for the first time in January of this year. But through that, we can get detail on loans going back literally into the early 2000s. So that was a big source of our information for determining rents, vacancy, expenses, and values. Scott, would you go to the next page?
Excuse me, are these gross rents and base rents when there's a triple net lease?
You know, it varies, and we can, we've got spreadsheets that we use for each one. These are largely net rents, Sam. One of the things that really has driven the change in assessed values from 2016 is that the cap rates we're using in 2019 are very, very, very different from the cap rates that were used in 2016 to determine assessed values. We can't find evidence of the documentation or support of the cap rates that were used in the 2016 assessments. And in fact, some of these cap rates we had to reconstruct from piecemeal data because the records from the 2016 assessment cycle for Evanston, frankly, are very poor. The cap rates that are listed for 2019 are the rates that the assessor's office used to determine rents, to determine values in 2019. I'm confident that the 2019 cap rates are what I would label generally reflective of market. But because the cap rates are so much lower than the rates used in 2016, the assessed values are much higher. We can talk about the implications of that as we get further into the program.
And we were looking at like CoStar and CBRE, and we were looking at various sources of industry data in order to come up with these particular cap rates.
Yes.
Does TREP have a minimum size to qualify for these bonds? Like they've got to be at least $1 million or $2 million loan?
TREP has loans that are as low as $500,000. I brought an exhibit which I'll pass around. I can pass it around now, frankly. Of apartment and commercial properties that were in Evanston. In TREP. I think for right now, we'll just do this. If we can pass these around. Yes.
What's the median cap rate?
Cap rate, think of cap rate as essentially the price earnings multiple for a stock. So if you were buying a stock at a 10 PE multiple, you'd take the earnings per share, multiply it by 10, and that would come up to the price the stock is trading. A cap rate is just very simply, it's the inverse of the price earnings multiple. So you divide the income by the cap rate. So $1 of income divided by a 10% cap rate, $1 divided by 0.1 ends up with a value of $10 a share, or $10 in aggregate. A cap rate of 5% would be $1 divided by 0.05, which would generate a value of $20. If you had $1 per share of income with a 10 PE multiple, that give you a $10 value, a PE of 20 would give you a $20 value.
So it's intended to be a predictor of income on a property, essentially, right?
It's intended, it's intended to give you a sense of what a dollar of income that is expected to recur on an annual basis is valued in, has a value in terms of purchase price. I don't think I was as clear as you would like me to be.
So you take this and you use this to factor in what you're, like, for a commercial building, you said it's about $14.6 per square foot. You figure out the square foot of the building, you apply this rate, and that's what you get the assessment.
If I could, another way to explain it would be, if you owned a building without a mortgage, it's the rate of return.
Right.
You would get.
Yeah, that's a great way to think of it. Question?
So, would it be fair to say that since I think we started out by saying there was pretty much no historical cap rate information for Evanston?
Right.
I think we said something to that effect.
Right, none that we can identify in the file.
So we don't have any fact-based rate, although we're posting a rate up here, and I think that that's problematic.
These are, that's a rate that we believe approximates what was used in 2016. What we do know,
How do we come to that conclusion? We take every property and back it in?
that's essentially what we were doing, right, Sam?
I'm sorry, I'm not following up.
How did we determine the 2016 cap rates?
Oh, so I think one of the differences this year is the way we're valuing property is, as many investors do, on the income capitalization method. Historically, the office wasn't tracking the research, so we had numbers, we had 11.5% cap rate, but there was no research to quantify where the office had gotten that. This year, we're using services such as CoStar, CBRE. We talked with other commercial mortgage offices. We're using TREP's implied cap rates to quantify our.
That doesn't speak to, we're posting a comparative number there, and the comparative number is relevant to this discussion, particularly with some of the increases that I'm sure that some of us have seen, at least I know we have. So I think that it's important that we have a fact-based comparison and not something that looks good in a presentation.
So, but I think the
Well,
point though is,
it's
if I can though, you were able to reverse engineer based on the values that were calculated in 2016. You're able to reverse
Yes.
engineer what the expected cap rates were. I'd also like to point out though.
Is that repeatable? Can a third party go in?
Sure,
and
you should.
property by property reverse engineer?
On the 2016 numbers?
Yep. I think-
Probably,
what about-
but the documentation is very poor.
Here,
What about-
let me just clarify something, because I think I understand the nature of your question. So your question is essentially, how can we believe, you're saying, look, we're trying to demonstrate the reason why the numbers are so different. And so it would be easy for us to just make up some numbers for 2016 and throw them into a PowerPoint presentation, and then come out and say, well, look how different those numbers are. That's why the numbers are different. What we had in the office were spreadsheets of cap rates from 2016 that were used to make these calculations. What we don't have is any documentation as to why those numbers were chosen. What is the math essentially behind those numbers? It's a little bit like you're turning in your math homework and you put the answer down, but you haven't shown any of the work as to how you got there.
I'd like to take just a minute, and I think if we look at this exhibit, we can get some sense of the issue, okay?
Can I be clear on something? So, what we got mailed out, these sheets, it lists, numbers from 2017, which is not 2016, 2018, and 2019. So what you're saying is, I think what you're saying is that the arithmetic that the assessor's office did during those years was flawed, and now.
I'm not saying it was flawed, what I'm saying.
But there's a big, can I finish what I'm saying?
Sure,
Please? I think what I'm hearing is that everything that was done prior to January 1 was flawed. And now we have better data to do what is supposedly correct in approximately 60 to 90 days, however long it took to do. So, you know, I just have a problem. I have a problem with that. It's like you're saying everything was done before by the assessor's office is no good, but now we got it right. So how do we know that?
I don't wanna say it was flawed. That's not what I'm trying to say. What I'm trying to say is, particularly for Evanston, we don't have good data in the files supporting how the valuations were determined in 2016. The reason we use 2016 is that we reassess a third of the county each year. So the last general reassessment of Evanston was 2016. This is the first general reassessment of Evanston since 2016. What I do believe is worthwhile to get a sense of real values is to look at the exhibit that I just handed out. So there's roughly 18 apartment buildings. Now, we have, the TREP model gives the name of the borrower, the address, but I'm not sure, we had no intention of specifically identifying individual properties or owners. But if we look at how these 15 or 18 buildings were valued and financed and this is largely by Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, we'll see that the aggregate appraised value for properties with appraisals going back to 2015 and some in 15, 16, 17, 18 was $223 million. The loan balance that was funded was roughly $99 million. The assessed value that was used to determine, the fair market value that was used to determine the assessed value in 2016 was $79.6 million, or roughly 36% of the appraised value. The assessed value that was used in 2019 is $188 million, or roughly 82% of the appraised value that was used by Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac to determine the loans that they were gonna make. There are only 2 commercial properties in Evanston financed by TREP, commercial being non-apartment properties, but the total appraised value was $89 million. The total loan balance was $60 million. Yet the 2016 fair market value was $22 million, roughly 25%. The fair market value is determined by the assessor in 2016 was 25% of the value that Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac used. The value that we're using is 80%. I'm sorry, you've had your hand up the longest.
Just a quick question. I know you're referencing data from various sources, whether or not it's been verified, and I know it expresses an opinion. But rather than focusing on the cap rate, I think I'm understanding, or I hope I'm understanding the questions that are driving here is, you didn't have the spreadsheet for the cap rates, but you had the appeals of the different property types that were filed before the assessor's office for the various apartments, commercials. The rule's always been, provide the last 3 years of income and expenses. Did you guys actually consult the files that some of the property owners filed just to see exactly where the performance is versus just applying, well, I saw it on CoStar?
Yes, we did.
How many?
I don't have the answer for how many.
And as far as like, when we assess properties in mass. We're looking at 4,000 properties and you said 60 days. With that, we're not valuing each individual individual property on its own merit. That's where the appeal avenue is open for you to appeal. We're valuing them as a whole in the sub-market type of the property value and use. For example, the property on here, and I think Donna spoke there, we just used 2 commercial as a sample to not inundate you with a bunch of numbers. The first property on the commercial line has a loan, an appraised value of $60 million, 2016 assessed value of $17 million. That property was, I did research it myself. I pulled it out. The income statement that they gave to the assessor's office said it was worth $15 million. Now, are they lying to us, or are they lying to the federal government?
And I don't wanna say lying.
Wait.
Misrepresenting values.
That's really strong.
It is, well,
I don't wanna say lying, but I will say that the numbers that are submitted and reported on TREP are frequently different than the numbers that have been submitted to the assessor's office.
Right, and there's an incident also on TREP that they may up the numbers. I understand what we're saying with the, but my question is, you were referencing 4,000. If we can, if you don't mind, go back to the screen where you were breaking down, I think it's at 200 apartments. If you can do by PIN, by the class code, you can completely sort how many of the appeals that they have. You can randomly select there versus just going on a national database, using the data of 2 commercial properties that are in the multi-millions versus, okay, only 50 commercial properties filed. Let's just do a quick check as kind of a check and balance. Because my clients are asking, well, I understand you guys use the mass appraisal system, but I can cite data all over the place, CBRE, all the brokers, but if the individual's been filing, whether or not we'll put the honesty, dishonesty, we'll put all that to the side, the caveats and disclaimers. Did you guys look at the file? Because they've been giving the rentals and stuff like that, and next thing you know, they have a 60% spike. How does that correlate? And they've been going in every year. So I'm not trying to derail the presentation, but I understand you guys looked all this data, macro, micro, but at the end of the day, Evanston's not the central business district of Chicago. It's a smaller snapshot. How much of a sampling did you do of the property types? So there's only 64 industrials. If all 64 filed appeals, okay, I understand it's a monumental task. But if there was only 20, whether or not you guys want to verify the data, but at least 20 is a better sampling than 2 commercial loans from TREP, is my main question. So if you guys consulted it, great, but there's still a disparity between the assessments.
There's a disparity between the historical assessments and the 2019 assessments. There's no question that there's a disparity. What we're trying to address is what's driving the disparity. We got a number of other questions.
Quick question, on the other chart with cap rates, what's the cap rate for mixed use? Because it's not on.
So a cap rate for mixed use, we try to allocate the cap rate, so make it very simple. If it's a building that's 50% apartments and 50% office, we try to apply the apartment cap rate to the apartment rent and the office cap rate to the office rent.
And the mixed use in this case is in the appendix, which is in the report that was sent out. It's also on our website. Mixed use was 7.5 for 2019.
I just want to clarify, because you said that there was only 2 commercial.
And I
And
misspoke.
that there were several, because there's 428 commercial properties according to here, just retail.
We just listed 2 for this presentation. I
So
misspoke.
how many were there, did you evaluate? Out of 400, because we have 428, how many did you have data on?
So I work with numbers all day. In my mind, I want to say there were about 48 properties in
So
TREP
less than 10%.
for Evanston
About 10%.
Township.
And that's roughly the amount of properties financed by, the amount of commercial properties financed by commercial mortgage-backed securities.
This is what I know. I've done my own evaluation using the data that I took off the assessor's site. And I truly believe that you guys did the job to your best ability. But I did 12 properties today that came up with, using your numbers on your website, year over year, 221% increase in their property taxes. I included.
No, I just wanna correct this. It's not in their property taxes, it's in their assessment.
If you use everything that's been disseminated on how to calculate, including the information in that document, then that's how it comes out one way. Let me just finish. I want you to that's all.
I'm sorry.
Okay, so anyhow, I did it that way. When I added my own portfolio in, that got hammered by 278.91%. I know that we're talking about numbers here, but really all the people in this room are here for is they can't afford to pay the property tax increase. At least that's what I think. And I believe that you guys are on absolutely 1,000% the right track on how we're evaluating. I just think the system might be pushed into service a little bit too early.
Can I just, I'm gonna take, I don't wanna.
One more second, then I'll shut up for the rest of you. All I know is if I made $100 in net income, using the system that's in play and the cap numbers, my income gets cut in half. I end up with several properties that I can't sell. I have several properties where I lose half or almost all my equity based on the system. Using the cap number up there, if you guys, I'll give you all my properties, you can write a check, and I'll walk away from the entire business because some of them are twice what they should be, based on the income of the property. I cannot pass on the $4 a square foot on my average net portfolio rental per square foot, which is $16 and change. I can't pass on that $4 to my tenants. I don't know what to do, and that's why I'm here. I need help.
And I understand, I truly do. And I'll be right back, but I want to address a couple of issues. You said, I'm going to paraphrase.
Okay.
You raised my taxes, okay? We raised your assessment. Look, let me finish.
Mm-hmm.
We raised everybody's assessment. And in fact, we probably did raise everybody's assessment. That's probably a little bit of exaggeration. I bet we could find one or two that didn't. But the real answer is that the taxes that somebody pays have a connection to the assessment, but the amount of dollars that are collected in taxes have nothing to do with the assessed value and have nothing to do with what the assessor says. Just make it really simple, if everybody's assessment went up 200%, nobody's tax bill would change.
Everyone, because the assessment is, just a second, folks, just a second. Well, we're happy to explain, but it's not gonna work if everybody's talking. No, ma'am, in truth, if everyone's assessment went up 200%, everyone is still paying the same division of the total property tax levy.
In the county, though, not in Evanston.
But everyone's assessment went up the same rate, and so the division is the same.
In round numbers, the amount of a taxing district's tax bill that comes from outside that specific community is plus or minus 15%. 85% of your tax bill comes from your own community, from primarily the schools in your community.
This is an ad valorem tax. It's the whole process is an ad valorem tax. The assessment is a big part of the final tax. You cannot now make a statement that it has nothing to do with the process.
It's how, no, it's how you said.
I didn't try to say it has nothing to do. What I said was, if everybody's assessment went up 200%, no one's tax bill would change. What the tax assessor does is ultimately allocate how much your share of the taxes from the Evanston school system is paid by you and how much somebody else pays.
Based on the fact of the total valuation of the process.
The amount of taxes collected does not change with the assessed value.
I think what you're doing though is hiding the process. You're walking away from your responsibility, saying, we do only this, and we're putting the whole responsibility on the local taxing. And that's not, that's really not an adequate position.
In all honesty, we are not trying to walk away
Well,
from,
just did.
The assessor's office has a legal duty to assess property, a statutory duty to assess property at its fair cash
Right.
value. And that's the
Right.
only thing that the
It
assessor's
does.
office does.
It has that. And I think there's another process here that we're not talking about. Yes, you've done your work, mass appraisal process. That's been done for Evanston. Now we get to the appeal process. And there are a tremendous amount of factors that will change those numbers in various ways. And I'm anxious to know if that is really going to happen, because what's happened so far, that has not happened. There have been very few changes.
I'm not following, changes
What
to
changes to what?
We've only-
Changes to the value.
Do you mean in previous
In
years?
No, in this year.
So this year, we've only had one township that's
That's the one I'm
closed,
talking about.
and my staff is still working on those values. They're not going out until the end of this week.
We've got.
I just reviewed many of
there
them. I
is-
can assure
there
you
is
some are
this-
changing.
This two-term process. Mass appraisal is the first part of that, but the individual appeals must then
Sure.
be accounted.
But we're
for.
still in the middle of that process, so it's factually incorrect to say that nothing has
And
changed.
that will affect both the the cap rates that you use. If we have a 60-year-old building, we're going to expect, that's a factor in how we're going to put a cap rate on that property. One factor. There are a number of factors.
There are a number.
And there are a number of various ways to arrive at a cap rate. You've presented one way, period. That's the only one you did.
And I don't mean to cut my answer to you short. This gentleman has patiently waited for a long time, and I want to try to, truly guys, we'll stay here as long as everybody wants. I want to answer every question. You've been very patient.
Two-part question. So what you're saying is, if I understand it, that although the valuations of the buildings may have gone up dramatically, sometimes 2 and 3 times, that the tax rate itself will come down so that the actual amount of real estate taxes that a property owner is being charged stays roughly similar. Is that what you're saying?
Yes,
Okay.
in its simplest form. Let me just give one great big picture. In all of Cook County, about $14 billion of real estate taxes are collected annually. That number goes up about 2% a year on average, okay? That $14 billion that's collected across all of Cook County doesn't change one iota based on the assessed values. That number is determined by individual taxing districts. In Evanston, the assessor's office has nothing to do with the amount of taxes collected.
Okay, so the second part of my question, or statement, is to do with the difference between commercial properties and residential properties and so on and so forth. In 1975, there were 23 new car dealerships in Evanston. New car dealerships are really healthy for the community. They collect lots of sales tax.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
They create jobs and so on and so forth. I am the last remaining new car dealer in Evanston. Historically, the reason that many of the dealers left were very high real estate taxes in Evanston, crippling. So last year, we paid, this is my real estate tax, on our buildings on Chicago Avenue, the Autobahn car dealerships, we paid whatever we paid.
Right.
$700,000, $800,000, something like that. We employ 210 people in Evanston. We're Evanston's largest sales tax provider, year in, year out. We lost about $1 million operationally in Evanston last year. I didn't pay myself a single dollar, not one. I can prove it. Now, if these assessments stay and the tax rates stay, I'm gone. And me and thousands of other small business owners, we're out of here. And guess what? You've created Detroit. Because the property isn't worth anything, because you can't sell it. So instead of the property being more valuable, you've made, if you kept on with this, and if you didn't change the tax rate dramatically, you've made all of our property worthless. Can't sell it.
Absolutely.
Richard, that's what I said.
Hundreds and hundreds of empty shops, empty businesses, empty restaurants. You will put us out of business. I'm gone. 200 jobs lost. Gone.
Okay.
And there's no tax dollars from the people that do lease. It has completely the opposite effect of what government is trying to do, which is.
Gentlemen, we've got developers we had a meeting with the neighbors the other night. We've got developers trying to buy the west side of Chicago Avenue from myself, Doc Abels, and we can redeploy our stuff into the other buildings.
That's a good deal.
Great project, right? So we've got several developers talking to us and saying, hey, we want to build a beautiful series of buildings on the west side of Chicago Avenue. It's great for everybody. They'll get young people don't use up the schools, young people don't, they're healthy, they don't use up Evanston Hospital. Get loads of young people living on Chicago Avenue. Guess what they said today? All the
Numbers
developers.
don't work.
All the developers, guess what they said today?
Yeah.
Sorry, the numbers don't work. On page
Until we understand what the real estate tax is.
So,
Absolutely correct.
there's nothing, no part of this that operates in a vacuum, that operates independent from any other part. The amount of taxes that are collected are set, as I said, by other bodies.
And if you're being straightforward when you say that, then we could probably all go to sleep tonight.
Yeah, but we can't go to sleep.
True.
But it is
You know,
true.
Look, I mean, there's.
So if the valuation went up and the rate went down, and the amount's roughly the same, we can survive.
Okay. We will get you, and we'll send it, to the Chamber of Commerce, the governing legislation that essentially proves that. But if you will give me you go to a movie and you have to suspend disbelief, right? I'm asking you to suspend disbelief on what I'm saying right now about the amount of taxes that will be levied. There are a whole host of issues. You've got an equalizer. You know one of the reasons the equalizer in Cook County is so high? One of the reasons the equalizer is so high is this. The Illinois Department of Revenue believes that the Cook County Assessor's Office has under-assessed properties. At the residential meeting, we had residential property owners, I'll just say uncomfortable, because the residential assessed values were up 25%. Guys, this is a complex issue, and it is not as simple as your assessment went up 281%, so therefore your tax bill is gonna go up 281%. There's a lot more residential properties in town in terms of value than there are commercial properties. Big picture, across the county, there's 1.8 million pins. There's only 120,000 commercial properties. While they're very large, the value of residential properties swamps the value of commercial properties. The tax bill, somebody talked about that, I think your quote was, I've got a year and a half to panic. You have a year and a half to panic if that's your strategy, but there's a year and a half to go through the process of getting the levy, getting the equalizer, and ultimately setting the bill. I can't tell you what your bill will be, but I would be highly confident that no one's bill is gonna go up by the percentage of your assessed value. This gentleman has had his hand up patiently for a long
Thanks
time.
for being here tonight, Linda, thanks for setting this up. If all of our assessments that I've seen went up 200%, I wouldn't be here. But we manage about 40 properties in Evanston. Twice a year, at the end of February, end of August, I make sure about 80 tax bills get paid to the Cook County. If all of them going up 200%, and I know for the whole county, that would take 3 years, because it's a triennial assessment, it's 3 parts, the city, Chicago, our portion, the next portion. But we are seeing like the sacrificial lambs out there first to get our haircut, and it's more than a haircut, this is gonna take off flesh, this is gonna be the scalp. If all of them went up 200%, which is a tripling of the value, I would understand that the tax rate maybe used to be 10, would now be 3.33. But not all of them are going up 200%. Some of them are going up the percentage you said, 281%. Some of them are going up 140%. Some of them are going up 70%, which is, hallelujah, a two-digit number.
400%.
There's some residential, well, we have another one, 380% went up. All commercial, stores on the first floor, offices upstairs, 380%. But I've also learned from living in Evanston, and clients live in Evanston, and people live in Evanston, some of the residentials have only gone up like 9%, 8%, 7%. So that's what concerns us greatly. So you mentioned 281%. We have a building that's 380%, that's the highest one. We have others that are 280% increases on these things. We have landlords and landladies freaking out on the phone, or some even coming to our office. They haven't been to our office for a long time, but this is worth coming to our office and, telling us all their fears. But if you get it so this building that has a 380% increase that I manage, or a 281% increase that you manage, you get it so only in reality, a year from now, the tax bill that's due in July of 2020, only 10% of that, that's still too much. We can't handle a 38% increase in taxes. We can't handle a 28% increase in taxes. It's kind of hard to get by in a 3.8% increase or a 2.8%. So, from what I've seen in the 40 properties we manage in Evanston, and like a handful I've known about residential properties, there is a big disparity between like 3.8% for some residentials and 380% paid off. And one of them which I have in my hand.
Do we have the residential, I'm sure there are properties that are up single digits, but the residential property assessment increase was round numbers 25%. Guys, I'm not trying to run away from the issue. This assessor is committed to a transparent process that is grounded in the market. And I hear somebody say that if I wanted to buy your property at these cap rates, you'd sell it?
In a heartbeat.
Absolutely.
Offer's still on the table.
If,
Nobody's buying.
Not enough money yet.
you have to ask yourself, is it market value? Is the property
That's
value
right.
that we set, is that what the market is dictating?
Can I
And if
ask
it's
something?
not,
The-
we're not gonna get them all right. And I'm not saying that everything that I put out was correct.
So take your time.
Well, we
Don't
have
kill us.
we have an obligation to put out in a time frame.
And then you give us 2 weeks to get all the information.
If you have 30 days to appeal, you know, submit your information, we will review it, and we will make a determination that is fair.
But we still have to pay our bills, and it still takes money to get time to get that money refunded to us if there is a mistake. Please explain page 5 of that document.
The first bill on these assessments will actually be paid, the real bill will be paid in the second installment of 2020. Okay? Whatever amount of taxes that you're gonna be obligated to pay based upon this assessment cycle, because your first installment is gonna be 55% of the bill that you paid in 2019. So you, and guys, I'm not trying to minimize the cost, but the bill, the payment is gonna be August, September of 2020. Sorry, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I thought we were a size stand or something, I was like,
Truth be told, I grew up downstate, and I'm a big time Cardinal fan.
New to the commercial property ownership, and so, I understand where you're talking about the cap rates and everything like that. Key component of that is you have the market rent, and then you take it by the square footage. And so, I'm looking at these property characteristics, what you get sent from a residential to commercial, I don't see anything about the building square footage, I just see land square footage. So I'm curious as to, you know, how do you assess these properties when you maybe have a lot, but then it's not built on the full lot?
And to the one gentleman's question about appeals, Cook County has less than perfect property characteristic data.
Okay.
Okay? It's a shock, but I think I needed to tell people that. They have less than perfect property characteristic data for single-family homes, for condos, for commercial property. We're pretty good for lot size, but actual building size, my confidence, if you said to me, how confident are you about any one property being, having the right square footage, it's gonna be way less than 90%, okay? One point of the appeals process is to give us factual information. How big is your property, okay? When it's all said and done, guys, more than anything, what drives assessed value for homes and commercial properties is the single biggest variable, how big is the property? If we have the wrong information, please provide the correct information.
And then what?
And we know, and we will sit here and tell you that our property characteristic data isn't perfect.
So I have a new construction building, 2 tenants, rooftop restaurant, okay, so I'm classified as a 2-story structure, even though my rooftop is seasonal, small up top. And right now, with the assessed value, prior to, again, this latest increase, the tax bill is coming in probably about 75% of net operating income. With this same tax rate applied from previously, and just going on a higher assessed value, you're saying it's a distorted picture. I'm looking at where my taxes potential for these tenants are 100%, if not greater than the rent. So I guess the question is, when you're looking at these values, you're coming up with these values, what other factors are you looking at? Are you looking at comps, building
try to look at every one of those things. We try to make size adjustments. We come up with average rents, average expenses, average vacancy, and then we make adjustments for size, for age, for condition, so that if a property is larger than average, we do a downward adjustment on rent. If it's smaller than average, we do a modest upward adjustment. In addition to having less than perfect property characteristic data, we have a classification issue that is old. If you have a one-story Target store, that's a different property classification in Cook County than a two-story Target store. I joined the assessor's office January 2nd. I'll just say, prior to January 2nd, I thought a one-story Target store and a two-story Target store were, and that the market looked at them as the same thing. If your second story is not fully finished and is only usable for a portion of the year, that's a strong basis for an appeal. I'm sorry, you had a question.
Yeah, maybe two or three real quick comments and then the question. One, I am heartened to have heard your experience because you're from Evanston, you were a banker, you really do understand, I think you actually understand what these people are saying. Because if you had like a customer that might be put out of business because of taxes. So I'm very happy with your experience. And just another quick thing on Target, a two-story building is worth less. It's not because it's just at least, that second floor is worth nothing if you don't have Target in it. You're not gonna lease it for anything. So one thing I think would really help in your road shows is to actually put the illustration of what you were describing to us, which is you've increased the assessed valuations so much for commercial, so much for residential, and if in fact Evanston collects like 200 million or whatever the number is, your tax is gonna be this, just to give people an illustration and not be committed to it, but just to give people comfort.
And we can do that. Let me just, I've got for Norwood Park, we did calculate those numbers and I don't know if we have them for Evanston. Commercial properties in Norwood Park, total assessed value was, after 2016, was approximately 20.5% of total assessed value across all of Norwood Park. After our valuation with 76% average apartment increases, but before an appeal process, commercial properties were 23% of total assessed value in Norwood Park. I've been cautioned over and over and over and over again, do not forecast what somebody's tax bill will be because there are way too many complications. But that said, just in my very simple-minded way of thinking, commercial properties would have paid 20.5%. And these numbers were total assessed value, so you already had the reductions for 10% of residential and 25% for commercial embedded in there. It would have said that in 2016, commercial property owners would have paid 20.5% of the total tax bill in Norwood Park, and in 2019 they would pay 23%. So that while some people had a 76% there was a 76% average assessed value increase. I guarantee, I'd have to go look at it, but I guarantee you that translated into, there were some property owners that had over 100% tax increase. But commercial property owners, on average, everything else staying equal, would have been about a 15% increase in tax bill. That's just the math.
One, just, I'm in retail shopping centers, and your cap rate of 7% is fantasy. It is, you get 7% for, you know, single asset credit tenants. The type of buildings that are on Evanston and stuff with, you know, like no parking, 4 or 5 stores, those are going for a 9 cap. There's no way they would ever sell for 7 cap, not only here, but really throughout the Midwest. And the final quick question is, do you think also the multiplier then will change based on what you're doing? It's hard to predict.
I've been cautioned over and over and over and over again to not forecast how any particular governmental body will respond. But if you accept that one of the reasons that the multiplier is as high as it is that Cook County assessed values historically have been as low as they have been relative to actual market value. Fritz would shoot me if I said this. That would suggest that a reduction in the multiplier would be appropriate.
The problem with everybody in this room is we're all in business. And what we have is an air of uncertainty. We can't do anything.
And I want to be fair to everybody, and with all due respect, you've commented more than anybody else. But I'll just say this. Anybody who can look at me and tell me there wasn't uncertainty before, I'll tell you, as a lender in this town for the last 15 years, I viewed the assessment process as highly uncertain.
Yeah, but it's not to the degree.
It's not to this degree. You know,
I got a question. So or a request, I guess. I completely understand that you cannot predict what that multiplier is or what the even total taxes that are going to be distributed amongst us all to pay. However, we have a new assessment. Could you not do a simple exercise of a previous tax year and say, and distribute that to show us what it would have been in the previous year based on these new assessments? Because that's going to give us an indication of whether our tax bill is going to go up, down, or stay the same.
I'm going to turn to my attorney. I will tell you, we have discussed that in the office, and I have been cautioned against it.
Because they're all going up?
Because it would be
You
wrong.
can't speculate as to what.
It would be, look, what I think, and look, Don is alluding to some different parts of the process. I put it up here. We have multiple different, we're here right now. This is literally the beginning of the process. We still have to go through, and I say we as in, I am also a property owner in Cook County, just like everyone else here is. We have to go through the Board of Review appeals process. Then IDOR sets a state equalize factor. Then we're applying that equalizer and any applicable exemptions to those values. Then we're getting the tax levy. Then the clerk's office is calculating the rate. And at the very end of the process is when the tax bills are mailed out. So there are multiple other parts of this process. Don's right in that none of this is taking place in a vacuum. And look, I understand everyone here is owning some type of commercial property, and everyone is already feeling pinched and pushed. And truly, I want you to know that everyone up here and everyone in the office, our sympathies are with you. It was not without some knowledge of what would happen when we were going to come in and we were going to fix this process. And we were going to find, we knew things like there's no documentation for cap rates. There's no telling how they got the rent and income information off of commercial properties. And we knew that in actually putting out industry-specific data, stuff that actually makes sense when you look at the CBREs and the CoStars and the TREPs of the world. And by the way, they're not just putting out data on Chicago business districts. They are looking at the Evanstons of the world. They're looking at the Norwood Parks of the world, the Columbuses, the Indianapolises, etc. They put up multiple classes of cap rates in order to help people like us and other folks in the business world understand the income generating properties of commercial properties. But there is a lot more to come in this process. And while I understand the sticker shock of looking at an assessment notice and seeing the percentage that went up and assuming that tax rates are gonna go up the same way, there are so many other aspects to this process that haven't happened yet, that if we were to use last year's data with this year's assessments and our office was going to say this is how it's going to be, I hope you can understand it would put us in a terrible position because we would essentially be guessing. And that's essentially what they've done in the past. And I think, quite frankly, you know, having spent some time around Don and Sam and aware of the methods that they're using, that's how this office used to operate. This office used to guess. And while I am very sympathetic to the fact that these assessments are going up and this is going to cause problems, and this is going to cause discomfort and it's going to cause increases in rates potentially, we are bound by law to actually do this work correctly and to do the math right and to come out here and show you how show our work. The level of reporting that we put out is supposed to give you a sense of how we got these numbers. We're not hiding. This office never used to come out like this and do this. And this is giving you a sense of how we got this work, so you have a very clear sense of the math behind it. The work was not done well before. And I think everybody in our office regrets the fact that this work that we're doing is certainly causing some sticker shock.
I've got two people right back here.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay, I'm a commercial real estate appraiser, so I just have a question. It seems like there's a little bit of circular logic that I don't know how you would avoid, so I appreciate the complexity of what you have to do. But like in Norwood Park, you said the commercial may end up being a 12, 15% guess, wild ass guess, increase in the taxes. Although they had much lower increases on average, or like 45% increases for commercial, where in Evanston.
In Evanston, part of the total assessed value increase is driven by, you've had new development in this town.
Right.
Okay? There was no, for all intents and purposes, Norwood Park is the same community it was 3 years ago, that it was 8 years ago, that it was 14 years ago. I don't mean that as.
Okay. All right, and that's actually kind of the side point for me. My question would really be, if people today, and you can see how people are concerned about their taxes, if they have today, knowing that there's been a big increase in assessment and nobody, literally nobody knows what the ultimate impact is on the tax bill, and anything that was bought 2 months ago, let's say a building sold in Evanston for $1 million in December of 2018. I'm assuming when you're using your comps, because you need to use comps for this stuff, then you'd say, okay, well, they just paid $1 million a month before the assessment, so we're gonna assess it at $1 million. Except for their expectation on taxes was about 5% of value, and now it's gonna be 7%. So are you my question is, are you and I don't know how you do it, but are you making a 15% downward adjustment to all of your comps because of the fact, and it's not your fault, you're just the assessor. It changes the market, so the market conditions are now superior 2 months ago than they were today.
There's so many layers in your question. There is a technical term in assessing called sales chasing. Okay, I didn't know what sales chasing was until I joined the assessor's office in January. Sales chasing says you look at what a property sold for, and that's the value you set on it. And what that does is it means that the assessment goes up for everybody who sells or buys a property, and it stays here if a property never sells. There's also a principle, we have to be uniform. So if we sales chase and the property that you talked about sold for $1 million, we market it $1 million, but the buildings just down the street that look just like it are assessed for $700,000, even though he paid $1 million, he's got to lay down appeal based on uniformity that says, you know what, you're assessing me at a higher value than my peer properties.
Right, but when all those peers get raised up to that same million, that's the only.
If theoretically, if we use sale values as our primary driver of valuation, it would. Ultimately, what we're using as our primary drivers of value is an income capitalization, and we use sale values as confirmatory evidence.
Is that for all property classes?
That's basically for all property classes. For single family homes, ultimately, the only tool we have is sale prices. But again, we go to great lengths to quote, not sales chase, but to determine average sale prices per square foot. Again, at this gentleman's question, what really drives value more than anything, square footage drives value, particularly in residential. You have a question?
Yeah, I'll make it quick because I have to get out of here. So, one of the things you keep saying is that, or that you said tonight, is that the files or the data that you had when you walked into the office is great, particularly when it comes to cap rates, but also I believe the gentleman in front asked if you went through, and saw how the previous assessor worked up the file, or what the rents were, and you said that you did it on some occasions. I was wondering if you worked with the board to review it all, because obviously, when you go to the board to review, especially when there's an oral hearing involved, there's, notes taken, they confirm, or they at least, they make me confirm with my clients what the actual rates are, what the actual vacancy is. And when I work, I'm an attorney, when I work on the file, I often go back and see what the board's notes were previous years, just to see where the market value's at, or how we got to the current assessment, et cetera. So I was wondering if your office has worked hand in hand with the board at all to obtain those notes, because there's obviously a ton of information, and the board, will only use certain cap rates in certain areas, so they obviously have research, although the previous assessor may have not.
I will say that, as far as I can tell, we have had more interaction with the Board of Review in the 4 months that Fritz has been in office than the assessor's office had with the Board of Review in the last 4 years. Okay, we're talking to them almost every day. We have arranged with TREP, the data that we're doing a lot to rely on to make that available to the Board of Review. This chart, I've got a chart that's 40 times larger and more complex than this chart that we prepared. I tried to put this chart together so that no one in this audience could figure out what a single property was, because I didn't think that was fair to the property owner. But that complex Excel spreadsheet that takes the data that's available in TREP is being shared in its entirety with the Board of Review.
And I think, and I appreciate your answer, I don't want to cut you off, rather than that, and I think that's great that both the board and the assessor are working together, and that makes perfect sense to me. I guess my question was more so, are you looking at the board's previous work rather than the assessor not transferring it in the office? Now, would you make this new data that you've obtained, because I have a lot of clients, obviously, that are having hard applications over these assessments, and they're saying to me,
And I will tell you that historically, there was not a lot of sharing in either direction between the board and the assessor's office.
Gotcha. And that, I'm so sorry, just one quick question. When you had the meeting, I think 2 months ago, just a general meeting, there was an email provided where questions were told to be directed
And my understanding is that anybody that was emailing us questions about that, those emails were going to various members of the legal department, Christina being one of them, and at least two other folks. So anybody that was emailing about those rules for appeal, if you've done that, you should have gotten an answer back. And if you haven't, can we talk after, and I can make sure that
I'm running out here with your favorite.
I can give you a card. I'm happy to do that.
This question over here.
This is really more of a perspective than a question. So, my business is 115 years old, family business. We bought a building about 50 years ago. So the way that we value our building isn't what the market values it, it's the utility that we get out of it. And so if we're forced to look at the market value and pay taxes based on the market value, the only way that we can attain the proper value out of the property is to sell it. I have tenants, so I have tenants and I run a store out of my business, and I know the kind of tenants that you can get for a 100-year-old building, and so we don't get the highest rents. And so this is, it seems to be the equivalent, this is like retail gentrification, where you're costing people out of the marketplace because I want to stay around, but retail is a very challenging area to be in right now, and the notion that my property value has gone up as much. Just two more points.
No, I'm smiling because
hopefully
I've been a real estate lender for the past 5 years. I've been a real estate lender for the past 46 years, but the past 5 years in particular, Amazon is remaking the retail landscape in America.
I think that's definitely true, but I think the biggest challenge, if you're a retailer, you can figure out ways that you can sell things.
Right.
What the issue we have is that our costs go up at a rate faster than our sales can go up. And we're, property tax is just one area, but you add them all up, and so we don't get pushed out because we can't make our customers happy and sell stuff. It's because we can't cover our costs because of things like this. And then just the last point I want to make, that your colleague had said something about guessing, and you don't want to guess. We're left in a position now where we have to guess, and we budget, and we all run very tight. Retail, again, it's challenging. So having this giant unknown on the horizon, it's very hard to plan.
And I assure you that I understand and appreciate the issue of guessing. I really, really, truly get it. We can argue about individual cap rates, but here's what I know. I know that a 9.25 cap rate in Norwood Park, and I've got good data on Norwood Park from 2016. I know a 9.25 cap rate in Norwood Park was wrong. And I know that 6% is a lot closer to right.
Yeah, but my customers won't pay more
And
because my cap rate is cheap.
And I understand that, and I understand that. My job is to determine the fair market value for all at the end of the day, I'm the chief valuation officer, okay? I have incredible admiration for Fritz Kagi as the assessor. His job is much different and much bigger than and much more important in many ways than chief valuation officer, but ultimately it's my job to get all the values right on all 1.8 million parcels in Cook County. Do you know what I know about the 1.8 million parcels in Cook County? I've got lots and lots and lots of values that are wrong. You can't get 1.8 million parcels right. One of the reasons we have an appeal process, am I standing in your way?
No, just when you're done.
Oh, okay. One of the reasons we have an appeal process, one of the reasons we have a board of review, one of the reasons we have the PTAB, Property Tax Appeal Board, is because I'm gonna make mistakes. And I apologize to you, those of you who are getting my mistake. But it is, I assure you, it is not a mistake out of malice or intent. It is, I can't get everything right out of $1.8 million. And we hope.
So, can I respond to that?
Absolutely.
So the consequence for you if you get it wrong is you guys go through the process again, and I don't attribute it to malice. I think you guys are trying hard, and I get that you, but the consequence to us is we are out of business if you get it wrong, or we move. So I think that to have such a dramatic change and to have us face the prospect that our business, the models for our business will no longer work. And I appreciate your kind words. I think they're heartfelt. I don't question your intention, but I feel like the consequences to property owners is lost. Because my increase is big enough that if it went back to what it was before, just what I would be paying my attorney for filing the appeal is punitive. So there's no win for me in this situation, unless the multiplier goes down dramatically. But my increase is 5 times the median in town. So the multipliers would have to. I don't foresee how I have to take a long view because I have a lot at stake here, and I don't see how this gets resolved in a way that keeps my tax bill.
The reality is, and this gets to the point you were raising, is the amount of taxes that are collected a flat amount, or is it an amount that goes up and down with changes in assessments, so that if assessments go up across a taxing body, will total taxes collected go up? I'll ask you just to accept that what I'm saying for right now, and we'll provide the statutory evidence, is that the total taxes collected are going to be the same amount.
I believe that.
But the reallocation is changing.
Our proportions.
The reallocation is changing,
And
but
it's a disadvantage to a lot of people.
But it's also disadvantaging, the current system is disadvantaging people.
A lot of our contracts were based upon the existing economics.
And I understand that, but there are, and when it's all said and done, the reality is, if commercial property is undervalued and therefore under-assessed and therefore under-taxed relative to its market value, homeowners are over-assessed and overtaxed. And I don't mean this as a statement that they're right and you're wrong. There are homeowners in Cook County who are being forced out of their homes because they cannot afford to pay the taxes.
Now businesses will be forced out of it.
And
homeowners will pay more once the businesses go out.
Did you have a question?
Yes, and it might be to Commissioner Sufferton, and it really has to do with the appeal process. I just want to say thank you, Commissioner, for what you did for thousands of homeowners here in town. I think your town hall helped a lot of people get some concrete ideas of how to appeal, and I think your office has helped a lot of homeowners. So thank you. And I'm wondering if your office is available to help commercial folks as well, or maybe the assessor's office would know an answer to my question. And that is, there was a movie out not too long ago in my lifetime where an attorney somehow got struck by divine intervention. He had to tell the truth, and it changed his life and his career. And I don't remember the details, but are we asking and I'm commercial as well, and are you asking us to be honest with you? We're not trying to sell our property. We're trying to give you an honest perspective of what we think the value is. And Commissioner Suffredin gave us some good ideas as homeowners in Evanston, like take a look at your basements and take a look at your attics and think of ways that you could reduce the assessment just on non-usable space that you have. And secondly, should we give our taxes, you know, from last year, the year before to you to show you and explain what our customers really are paying us for our business? Should we be honest in this?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
First of all, I want to thank the current assessor. And the communities we live in overwhelmingly voted for Fritz Kagi to be the assessor instead of Joe Barrios.
Right.
The result was, Fritz said he is going to try to get everything back to a reasonable, fair market value that people can believe in. Now, we are only the second township that he's assessed. So we're somewhat at a disadvantage, and Norwood Park has no comparison to Evanston. The third township they've assessed, the one I represent, New Trier, also from a commercial perspective does not have the same characteristics as Evanston. Its commercial base is much smaller. In the 16 years I've represented this area, the assessor's office has never come out to have a discussion with commercial owners. So I want to first thank the office for doing that. I'm guessing, as I looked around the room, that about a third of this room are lawyers who are really representing people. And the reason I don't do commercial property, Dan, is because there's too many moving parts. And I really believe you all should have lawyers to do this because it's too complicated. Now, one of the things that I want you to understand, and I've said this to the residents, we're on a 1.5-year long journey together, okay? That journey involves first getting through the 30 days, and it ends next Monday, so make sure whoever you hire gets your appeals in by next Monday. You then have a little more time to get data. But I've said it, the new assessor, he is more like the baseball umpires of the 50s before instant replay. He believes his numbers are correct. We are going to get less relief from the assessor, and that's not a bad thing. That's just they have confidence in the process they put together. The Board of Review, which has broader jurisdiction and is a court of equity, can look at a lot of different things. It's going to be where the action is on all of this. Now, one of the things that, when you look at the numbers, the commercial base in Evanston is now 40% of the overall value of property in the town. It had been at about 25%. So it did go up 15%. And the residential side went down 15%. And that's based upon a press release that their office put out. But again, we're trying to figure out how we're all floating in the same area. And that's why you got to appeal. You got to fight for yourself. I tell the homeowners, there's 10 people on your block and 5 appeal, they get a reduction. The other 5 are going to pay more. You're the only ones who can appeal. My mantra is appeal twice a year. You got to go to the assessor, and then you got to go back to the Board of Review. You can go to PTAB, but that's 7 years or 6 years, whatever it is, or you can go to the circuit court. But I do think you should appreciate the fact that this is the first time I've seen the assessor come out here to talk about their numbers. Now, these presentations are online for both the residential side and for the commercial side. And I suggest you spend some time looking at it. It's hard in this kind of a format to talk about these numbers, to talk about how we get to these various places. But I also believe, I saw Samantha, who now lives in Evanston, I won't tell you which block, but she's been passing out her card. And the office will respond to any of your questions. That's the one thing I've seen as a commissioner. My goal isn't to defend their numbers. My goal is to help my constituents. You are the employers of my constituents. Some of you are my constituents. So if our office can help you, we'll try. But I don't think we can help you do the appeals because your stuff is really going to be looking at the approach they want to take, which is really market income driven. And they have a bill that passed last week in the Illinois Senate, which will mandate for commercial property going forward. Now, it won't apply to you guys this year because it's not going to pass in time. But since the county is divided in a third on these 1,800,000 parcels, for the south suburban area, which is the next year, all commercial properties are going to be required if this bill passes the House as it did in the Senate to produce income numbers so that the way that these numbers are put up here are based upon reality. You know, some people talked about some of it's at the Board of Review. Yeah, some of it's at the Board of Review, but now that's at the Board of Review under the old assessments, and we've got to try to figure out how to get them to share information. This bill allows them to share information between the Board of Review.
Ultimately, our goal is to get the values right.
Yeah, that's the goal.
We don't, I mean, many of you are attorneys, but our goal is not to force you to have to pay for someone to get an attorney. You can go to our website. We have a form called the Real Property Income and Expense Form. If you fill that out, you're honest with us, we will look at it. I'm a former assessor myself. I was a former tax representative. Bob Borman was a client of mine, very familiar with car dealerships, and they are tricky. Every individual property is unique. Our task from the beginning is to do a mass approach, and it isn't correct. It's not always going to be correct for every property. And we will look at it on an appeal, more of a granular level, and value, like, were we correct? Or do we really miss the mark on this property because of X, Y, Z reasons?
When you appeal, help us make your case, okay? Help us make your case. I had a conversation with an attorney today, and they had made an appeal, and they provided one page of an income statement and one page of the balance sheet, and at the bottom of each page it said, these financial statements are to be read in conjunction with the auditor's notes and commentary. And I said to the attorney, you didn't provide the notes and commentary. And his response was, I've never provided it before. Okay? He didn't help me make his case for him. Help me make your case. Yes?
So with that right form, filling that out, like the cost of goods sold for someone, that's not part of the assessment. It's maybe what you're actually generating for income leasing the property. There's a lot of information on that right form that no one's gonna fill out because it doesn't pertain to their case. It's occupied.
If you are a property owner, leasing the building, and you got net rent, guess what?
That's all you put down in the form. So if it's a tenant occupied space and they're responsible for the taxes, the form's pretty much blank then, right? And it wouldn't be denied because it's blank.
It would not be denied because it's blank, but you are providing us the information.
Yeah,
that.
as long as it's just like written on there,
No.
tenant occupied, and they don't pay.
Forms are meant to be a single document that can capture as much, that can be as relevant to as many people as possible. For the great majority of investor-owned buildings, that form is really gonna be pretty simple. What were your rents? Were your leases gross or net?
But do you want to see 2019 numbers, or do you want, because it's not, the year's not complete.
No, we would like to see your most recent fiscal years.
Yeah, okay, so
Okay.
ideally 2018 then.
Ideally 2018. If your fiscal year ended for whatever reason on September 30, provide the September 30 data.
Okay, and then as far as appraisals are concerned, are you guys looking at appraisals? The assessor's office doesn't normally, are they going to start to do that?
We accept appraisals. I want to be very careful how I say this.
Backing evidence maybe, okay.
One of these properties, the commercial property with a $40 million loan balance and a $60,900,000 appraisal for a CMBS issue that was Securities and Exchange Commission registered. The year after that loan was funded, the owner of that property submitted an appraisal that said the property was worth $16 million. I did not find that appraisal credible. There is a commercial property in the North Shore where the owner of the property submitted an appraisal in 2016 that said the property was worth $12 million. The owner of the property sold it in 2017 for $48 million.
Incredible.
That stole money from you. That stole money from you. That stole money from you. Okay? My first job coming out of the University of Illinois, I worked at Equitable Life, which is no longer Equitable Life, it's AXA Insurance, and I went through a 2-year training program that was designed to make me an appraiser. I don't admit that to a lot of people. If you're gonna give us an appraisal, give us one that does not insult my intelligence. I read an appraisal today that told me interest rates are being managed by the Federal Reserve and therefore aren't relevant for valuing properties, and interest rates are surely gonna go up in years in the future, and therefore he wanted to use a much higher cap rate because interest rates in the future are gonna be much higher. That insulted me. The US government issues $1 trillion of new government debt every year, and they roll over $3 or $4 trillion of debt. We can figure out what market interest rates are, because that market's really liquid. So help me make your case, give me appraisals, and I won't say again, don't give me an appraisal that insults my intelligence. Yes?
Do you envision the need for commercial tenants to submit their P&Ls?
No way.
So that you can see
No,
how much
absolutely not.
margin they have and whether they can afford a higher tax component of their rent?
I think it's on the form, that's what I was asking.
At the end of the day, what the tenant can afford or not afford, and I believe this truly in my bones as a real estate lender, is reflected in the rents that they are paying in the current market. And what we are supposed to value is the rents that are being paid in the current market today. So a retailer who signed a lease in 2007 when the market, everything was hunky-dory at rents up here, and that retailer has not subsequently gone bankrupt, which so many of them have, but his rent, and his rent is still up there. I'm not supposed to value that rent from 2007. I'm supposed to value the properties based upon the rent that's being paid in the market today. Help us understand what those market rents are. That helps us come to value estimates. Are our numbers right? You know what? I think they're kind of that right. I think they're a pretty good estimate. I think they are reliable across the board, but that's not the same thing as precision. You can help us achieve precision, and that's what we want to do. That's our goal, guys.
I would also say, as this chart kind of illustrates, and as the commissioner had said, we are at the beginning of the story. It is not the end. It is not what you received as an assessment notice. It's not a property tax bill. So while nobody's good time is an appeals process or the board of review or looking at IDOR's equalizer factor or the clerk's rate, those are the things that are going to come after this that are going to help determine what the final tax bill is. The gentleman in the blue, raised several important points about the concern about being pushed out. While
all of us are concerned about the health and economics of the county. I don't believe any of us think that the assessment notices that you received are the end of things. It is the beginning of getting this right and working with you, not against you, but with you, to make sure that the numbers are in fact more precise than they are now. And that's something that I hope that you've seen based on our willingness to come out here and to take your questions. It is, Sam's passed out several cards. I've got a few in my pocket as well that I'm happy to hand out. We're happy to continue answering questions tonight, but also, you know, other nights and other days and in emails and calls from here.
I think mine's pretty quick. Is it fair to say that the questionable or lack of sufficient supporting documentation for 2016 goes back further than that? It's not like just 2016 was bad, but you're trying to correct a longer than a 3-year.
I'm not spending a lot of time investigating other years. Guys, I've been and staying on top of that.
I just want to make sure I'm characterizing it to.
But yes, I mean,
accurately.
the issues that were at play in 2016, the way in which things were calculated, that wasn't exactly it's fair to say, looking over at our lawyer, that the issues that were at play in 2016 were at play in prior years. It's probably a legally safe way to put it.
Elk Grove is our next township. Guess what? We're finding similar issues. We started work on Main Township. Guess what? We're finding similar issues. If I were a betting man, I would bet that when we get to Schaumburg, we'll find similar issues. And when we get to Barrington, we'll find similar issues. And when we get to Northbrook, we'll find similar issues.
And the fact that we're finding them, I think, it's showing that we are doing the work and that we are trying to achieve precision.
I'm sorry?
It's sensitizing you to our conflicts and our problems.
Yeah.
That's good.
I understand with that proposed law regarding financial disclosure, if a property owner submits his rent roll with lease expirations, things like that, it's public, so everyone.
No, it is absolutely not public.
It is not?
And there are penalties in there. There are criminal penalties if an employee of the assessor's office leaks it. Christine, you're probably better qualified.
Well, no, you're right. I mean, that stuff's not public information.
It would be anonymized and put in bulk and only released on a market level. So individual property will not be reported. It is not FOIA-able.
Rates will not be subject to FOIA.
It is, the only reason we're releasing it is we would release it because we believe that knowing the actual true cap rates of an area would facilitate investments, and it would make it possible for property owners like yourselves to actually understand what happens after the investment happens. So it's not going to be traceable on an individual level. There are criminal penalties in order for if anyone releases the data from our office or from a township level. So
what's going to actually happen with that? You submit your information, you do your adjustment. Does the specific statements of every property then get destroyed, or?
The information would get, the information would get destroyed, I believe. It's an electronic submission process.
Right now, the REIT, the real estate.
The RPIE.
Yeah, RPIE, excuse me. The RPIE is available electronically. It cannot be uploaded electronically at the moment. You can input all of your data into the form and then print it out and submit it. We will keep those files.
But I think he's talking about once the law passes and they're submitting rent and income data.
After the fact.
Yeah, that information would be.
Will not be made public.
you know, it would stay with the property, because you don't wanna appeal every year. I mean, I'm sure you get sick of having to file the paperwork, and why can't the assessor's office get it right? Our goal is to get it right, and just to be able to look at your properties and say, oh, this has an issue, and it's had a market issue for whatever reason, but we now know what those reasons are, and we can make those determinations ahead of time. So that's our goal.
I was just concerned because I was told it is public and, you know, from a competitive standpoint, you don't want, people.
Obviously not, no, and, you know, this information, we could have given you addresses, we have no
Oh,
obligation to it.
that information is all absolutely public. The number of people who have access to the truck model, and everybody can go online and find out what somebody's assessed value is, so all of that all is absolutely public, and we're trying to anonymize that.
So when you said, help us with, convince you in the appeal, and help other people in your office help convince them in the appeal, what are the things for the limited time you have to look at our property parcels and assessments? What are the most important things, make sure we have in our appeal that?
Tax returns for the property, financials for the property, capital investments that you had to make in the property, what's the size of the property, send us pictures, let us see that your building is 100 years old and it's competing with buildings that are 15 years old. We really want to hear the story. If you tell us the story, we're better able. It sounds like it sounds like naivete, but we talk about the taxpayer a lot. I'm 68 years old. I did not do this to get rich, okay? I'm doing this because I truly believe that we have had a broken system. And Chicago and Cook County has, I grew up downstate, town was 900 people, we didn't live in town. I was the first Meyer that ever went to college. This town, the greater Chicago community, gave me more than I could ever imagine I had the opportunity to do. And at the Cook County Assessor's Office, in my view, we have failed this community. And I believe I've got an obligation to get this right. And I know if I do 1,000,008 parcels, I'm gonna get them wrong. But when you help us tell the story, don't just submit a one-page income statement, one-page balance sheet that's at the bottom that says, see the attached notes, and then not supply the notes. That's what I mean.
For net income, for proving net income, do we have to show reports?
Pardon?
We need more than 3 hours of
proving net income.
It's right up already. We need more than.
Yes.
So I think that I've heard a lot about how the assessments were largely property income driven. I don't think that I heard anything about owner-occupied spaces where the owner fully occupies it for the activity of that business. So I was.
So for owner-occupied properties, we would like you to submit the same information. By and large, what we look for, so.
What is the same information?
Your earnings information from that property. By and large, what we try to do for an owner-occupied property, we're in Elk Grove Village. Tons of Elk Grove Village buildings are owner-occupied. Tons are investor-owned. When it's all said and done, there's a 10,000-foot building that was built in 1982 with 18-foot clear, sitting right next door to a 10,000-foot building built in 82 with 18-foot clear, and one is owner occupied and one is leased to a tenant. We want to put the same assessed value on both buildings. That's our goal. To do that, we're gonna use rent comps from the investor-owned buildings. You can help us understand your ability to pay rent by showing us your results of operations. But at the end of the day, we're gonna look for market information.
But that's owner occupied, you're assuming a retail establishment, or if you're an office, it supports multiple things across the country from there, so that's not this way. That building is not driving that revenue.
Right.
And so how am I supposed, that's me, for example, so how am I supposed to tell you how much my portion is worth, I guess?
In that case, among the best pieces of information that you could provide in an appeal is an appraisal
Okay, that's good.
that
I have it.
respects my intelligence,
Got it.
okay?
Any other questions? We're happy to stick around for an individual one-on-ones with people. Sam's given out her card. I'm happy to follow up with people as well. Thank you for coming out.
Thank you.
Thank you all for coming.